This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. Last show before election week, so take a really good look at me. I won't look this anxiety-free for a while. Voters are being targeted by false messaging in the run-up to next week's election. We'll tell you what themes to look out for and why experts say those efforts could be effective. Plus, independent music venues are trying to stave off permanent closing time by asking for federal assistance. But first, here's what you need to know right now. French military and police are patrolling the streets of Nice after a knife attack that left 3 people dead.
Il ne fait aucun doute que l'auteur de ces actes, qui n'a cessé de répéter en boucle devant nous Allahu Akbar alors qu'il était médicalisé sur place.
France's anti-terrorism prosecutor's office has opened an investigation into the attack. This is the 3rd attack in the last few months that authorities say came from extremists. It comes during renewed anger over cartoons depicting the Prophet Muhammad. Hurricane Zeta has battered the Gulf Coast with strong winds and a dangerous storm surge, leaving behind a trail of damage.
I don't remember the last time we had a storm of this magnitude in October.
More than 2 million people are without power and at least 3 people are dead after the hurricane made landfall. Zeta, now a tropical storm, continues to advance across the southeast and up the east coast. Zeta is the 27th named storm this year. That's the most named storms in the Atlantic in almost 20 years. The latest GDP numbers are in, and on the surface, it looks like good news. Gross domestic product, the broadest measure of economic activity, grew by a record-breaking 33% between July and September. But the gains don't make up for the epic collapse seen in the first half of the year. With coronavirus cases surging, hiring sagging, and government aid drying up, economists forecast that it will take until at least the end of 2021 to see GDP return to levels seen pre-pandemic. I gotta be honest, I don't love all those voter outreach texts I've been getting, mainly because I've been called Brian, Jacry, Devontavius, everything but Christian. But that's not so bad compared to what some people have experienced. Just straight up false messaging meant to fool voters ahead of next week's election. Newsy's Sasha Ingber spoke to the experts who explain why they might be effective and what themes we'll see come November 3rd.
What you're about to hear is false.
Mail-in voting sounds great, but did you know that if you vote by mail, your personal information will be part of a public database that will be used by police departments to track down old warrants?
Robocalls are just one way voters could be fooled before the election. Fake text messages and emails gathered by Newsy show how personalized these tactics can be.
My inclination is that it would be more likely to be believed. Certainly by many Americans. When you get a direct text message or even an email, that is to you.
A recent email threatening voters in Florida and Alaska appeared to be from the far-right Proud Boys group. Authorities tied it to Iran.
We have already seen Iran sending spoofed emails designed to intimidate voters.
In the spring, analysts found a U.S.-based data company sending false texts to voters in swing states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Georgia.
They were essentially providing a range of different messages to voters saying, you're not registered to vote, this election is critical, click on this link.
In Oklahoma, the state election board tells us a text message is under investigation. It falsely claimed a voter's polling location had changed.
This kind of activity for the bad actors that do it is cheap.
The examples go on. This week, 2 conservative operatives were indicted for allegedly arranging some 85,000 robocalls, which falsely warned people mail-in voting could lead to arrest, debt collection, and forced vaccinations. They targeted cities with large Black populations like Detroit. Some disinformation experts say the fake emails and texts started during the Black Lives Matter protests. More false information will come after voters cast their ballots.
It's going to be a lot of stories that we've sort of already seen of people saying, I saw this thing. One of the biggest problem areas is going to be in what comes out about the election results, how ballots were actually counted, who's in the lead.
Authorities say they're on top of the threats.
And we're not letting our guard down.
Still, experts worry these vehicles for false information pose new challenges.
Text messaging is the official way that states communicate with individuals in the case of emergencies. Those channels can be corrupted in a lot of different ways.
In Washington, Sasha Ingber, Newsy.
Do me a favor, go grab your cat and bring them really close. We'll meet back here after you do that and after you watch a few ads.
We take a step away from the noise and spin to really hear the stories that need to be told. Newsy cuts through.
We dig a little deeper on the stories of the day to help start making sense of it all.
I was tempted to play one of those cat videos right here. You know, the ones with the mice zipping around on screen. Yeah, that would have been messed up. Instead, we'll just talk about one of the most oppressed domestic felines in the cat world in our trending topics. I'm a cat daddy, so I couldn't resist this one. It's National Cat Day, and that means people have been posting cute pics of their furry friends on Twitter all day. Not to make things racial, but black cats don't always have it so easy. There is actually something called the black cat bias. One study suggested it's because black animals in general are harder to photograph, making them less appealing. There's also a deep-rooted superstition against black cats, saying they could be bad luck. In recent years, several black cat rescue organizations have popped up to try and change the misconceptions and end the discrimination, especially this time of year.
Maybe we should think of Halloween as a potential time to promote black cat adoptions, because we do know that black cats appear to have some disadvantages in the shelter. They just tend to stay a little bit longer.
With Halloween right around the corner, we felt it was our duty to dig into a pretty serious topic: costume trends. Here's what Google's Frightgeist had as the top 5 costumes searched this year: a witch, a dinosaur, Harley Quinn, a rabbit, and a clown. Nothing too out of the ordinary, really, but this year we could also see some new costumes. I mean, 2020 has given us plenty of options. Sports Illustrated offered up the idea of the NBA bubble by wearing your favorite team's jersey and covering yourself in bubble wrap. There were also plenty of searches for Tiger King characters, toilet paper, hand sanitizer costumes, and of course, a Karen. Spirit Halloween store has a costume for her, complete with a name tag and a shirt that says, "Can I speak to your manager?" Which just don't. Somehow, we also got a Girl Scout kerfuffle this year, and surprisingly, it had nothing to do with the discontinued cookies. On Wednesday, the organization posted a congratulations to Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett, highlighting her and the 4 other female justices that have been appointed to the High Court. The backlash was instant, with several users calling it tone deaf, arguing Barrett is the opposite of what the organization stands for. Girl Scouts couldn't catch a break after deleting the tweet either, with some saying they caved to online pressure instead of standing by their tweet. Either way, they just kept on trending. After it was removed, the Girl Scouts tweeted again saying, "We shared a post highlighting the 5 women who have been appointed to the Supreme Court. It was quickly viewed as a political and partisan statement, which was not our intent." Following it up with another tweet saying that the Girl Scouts are neither red nor blue. Keep an eye on the Girl Scout cookie index over the next few weeks. If there's a dip in Thin Mint sales this year, we know why. Remember live performances? Yeah, they were just another cultural casualty from this devastating pandemic. And while we all can't wait to get back to our first show, we might not be able to be in the same venues that were standing before the pandemic kicked off. Indie music clubs and concert halls especially are in dire straits. And as Newsy's Casey Mendoza reports, they could close without a federal financial boost.
It's Independent Venue Week, an annual celebration of live indie music clubs and concert halls around the country. But this year, rather than celebration, venue owners and music lovers are focused on survival.
And we're seeing venues close consistently, regularly.
Since the start of the pandemic, more than 80 indie venues around the country have closed. And without support from the federal government, industry leaders say more closings are likely to come.
These are individual owners. These are small businesses. They are locally owned. They are mom and pop shops. If we don't get funding, we're going to lose 90% of independent venues across the country.
With no revenue coming in from live events, coupled with mounting expenses from bills, insurance, or payroll, Some venues are playing virtual concerts, selling merchandise, or keeping kitchens open for online orders. Nationwide efforts from the National Independent Venue Association and the Recording Academy are hosting concerts and collecting donations for emergency relief funds. The Venue Association, whose concert series SOS Fest hosted artists like Dave Matthews, Reba McEntire, The Roots, Miley Cyrus, and Monica, has so far raised more than $1.8 million to help indie venues.
Had it not been for this venue, I don't know exactly where I'd be, because this is the place that all of my dreams began to come true.
The efforts from artists and donations from patrons show heavy support for struggling indie venues, but that might not be enough in the long term.
These aren't solutions. These are short-term, it's like putting putty in a wall as the earthquake is happening.
Instead, the music industry is pushing for federal financial support from legislation like the Save Our Stages Act, a $10 billion measure that has bipartisan support and was included in the House of Representatives' $2.2 trillion COVID relief plan, but has stalled in the Senate.
Music is one of the most amazing parts of America's culture.
That's why I support the Save Our Stages Act and look forward to being back in these venues soon.
We're 7 months into the pandemic. Our plight has been made clear. We have a potential resolution, and until that resolution is put into place, I don't know what people are expecting to happen other than more closures.
Casey Mendoza, Newsy, Chicago.
In case you didn't know, this month is Filipino American History Month. Shout out to my Pinoys and Pinays. While there's plenty to celebrate, the coronavirus pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on some within the Filipino community. Frontline workers like nurses have labored through increased risks of contracting COVID-19 throughout this pandemic. And much like the general population, the coronavirus impact has hit harder in some communities than others. Newsy's Kat Sandoval tells us how Filipino nurses have been killed by COVID-19 at a disproportionate rate, despite making up only a small number of people within the profession.
She loved to dance, sing. So I was also into dancing and singing, so I really miss dancing with her.
Rosalie Castro lost her twin sister Rosary to the coronavirus in March. Rosary was a sister, a mother, and like her twin, a nurse. And because they sometimes worked together in the same LA hospitals, right after Rosary passed, a coworker mistakenly called Castro by her sister's name.
I didn't want to pass out at the time. So what I did, I squatted against the wall and I just started crying in agony. And the whole floor heard me. All the nurses came to where I was. I was kneeling on the floor crying because I missed my sister so much.
And like her colleagues here today, Janine even fought to protect her patients on the front lines of this deadly pandemic.
Filipino American nurses like Rosary are disproportionately killed by COVID-19. National Nurses United says that 31.5% of the nurses who died from the virus are of Filipino descent, despite making up just 4% of the registered nurses in the U.S. Many work in nursing homes where COVID has been particularly problematic.
A lot of our Filipino Americans work in areas and units where COVID-19 patients are being cared for. And because of the lack of personal protective equipment, Filipino American nurses are dying.
According to the study, 58% of nurses who died are people of color, and of all nurses who are people of color, more than half of them are Filipino. Since the 1960s, after the U.S. established nursing programs in the Philippines, over 150,000 Filipino nurses have immigrated to the U.S. About a third of all foreign-born nurses in the U.S. come from the islands, and they work alongside generations of American-born Filipino nurses as well.
A number of us are able to stay at home. We are able to shelter in place and work at home. But Filipino nurses who are working on the front lines in this country don't have that privilege. And so one of the things that we can do is learn about their presence, learn about their history and the historical contributions they have made to American healthcare.
In a website called Kanlungan, which means shelter, Jolene Levid and a group of 5 volunteers have been keeping track of Filipino healthcare workers around the world who have died from COVID. Based on her data, about 3 times as many Filipino healthcare workers have died in the U.S. than in the Philippines.
You know, some of the most difficult tasks that we have for the website, people think it might be the research. It's actually going through photos of the deceased and trying to choose the one that shows them in their joy.
On one of those pages is Rosary Castro Olega. Levid calls her tita or aunt. They're not related, but she was a close family friend. Creating this website was one way to remember her and the so many nearly forgotten Filipino healthcare workers.
My sister died from this virus, so it's like nurses, I know we have to work and make a living, but if you're sick, take care of yourself because you only have one life to live.
Kat Sandoval, Newsy, Chicago.
If you haven't already, give us a shout on Twitter using the hashtag NewsyInTheLoop. We can talk about news, but I don't mind offering up personal information too, like finding the right mask is hard because I've got a big face and small ears. You feel me? In the early days of the pandemic, health experts suspected continued isolation and economic anxiety would contribute to another health crisis: drug abuse and overdoses. Now, a recent study is confirming that surge in non-prescription and illicit drug use through almost 1 million drug tests. Newsy's Lindsay Thies explains.
Hi, good morning.
At Skyridge Medical Center in Lone Tree, Colorado, healthcare workers and Denver police shift from a COVID pandemic to fight the opioid epidemic.
There's another one. We've already beat last year's total in weight for medications. I think this is something that our community really needed.
In 4 hours, Skyridge and 2 other hospitals and police collected 800 pounds of unused or expired prescription medications from people driving by and dropping them off, no questions asked. It's just one way health experts are fighting a growing overdose problem. Colorado is one of at least 40 states where overdose deaths are rising in 2020. In the early months of the pandemic, the overdose mapping application program said suspected overdoses rose by 18% in March, 29% in April, and 42% in May. That's compared to the same months in 2019.
Drug testing, for lack of a better word, almost fell off the cliff. We just stopped getting samples in for drug monitoring.
Dr. Jeffrey Gooden is a clinical professor at Rutgers University and a senior medical advisor for Quest Diagnostics. Quest runs a network of more than 8,000 drug test collection sites. A recent study of nearly 900,000 drug tests found a surge across the board in non-prescription and illicit drug use. Fentanyl, heroin, and opiate-positive tests were all up. Quest also found an increase in fentanyl getting mixed in with other drugs, including 89% for amphetamines like Adderall, 48% for benzodiazepines like Valium or Xanax, 39% for opiates like Oxycontin, and 34% for cocaine.
To me, as a clinician, that is just astounding.
Gooden says parts of the country have started to bounce back more than others. Loosening home drug testing options can help. Federal regulators have also relaxed the number of methadone doses patients can take from treatment centers and are using telemedicine to initiate medication. But with COVID cases surging, winter on its way, and more people inside and isolating, Gooden says it's important for doctors to be proactive.
It's important that clinicians start to talk to their patients about substance misuse, talk to them about alcohol consumption, talk to them about how they're handling their stress, get them involved with online behavioral programs.
I'll take it.
Back at Skyridge, Dr. Eric Lung says what doctors prescribe is also key to this fight. In the past year, the hospital's doctors prescribed 35% fewer opioids. It's a battle he anticipates will continue long after the COVID pandemic is over. Lindsay Thies, Newsy, Denver.
We've been talking a lot about this election, and it's finally days away. There are already some predictions floating around, and come election night, some news outlets might offer up projections. So how exactly are winners projected before the votes are counted? Newsy's Stephanie Liebergen explains in this installment of our Vote Smarter 2020 series.
How does the news call races before all the votes are counted?
They call races because they have teams of political experts, experts in demographics, experts in polling, experts in electoral history that can look at the results and see the trends.
In the U.S., there are two primary organizations that project winners, the Associated Press and the National Election Pool for Medicine Research. Major media outlets also have their own race-calling teams. Exit polls that ask people how they voted after casting their ballot play a key role in making those projections. And both the AP and Edison are taking steps to account for all the votes that will come in before November 3rd.
We're going to be devoting more resources to exit polling people at early voting centers in states where a large proportion of vote is done at early voting centers before Election Day. And then we'll be doing more interviews by telephone of people who mail in their ballots.
News outlets rely on phrases like too early to call or too close to call to report on results before a winner can be projected.
We're not going to be able to call every race on election night. That we're not even going to have votes for every race in some states on election night.
And it's important to remember that the vote tallies on election night might be skewed, depending on what type of ballots states tabulate first.
So dramatic differences between how election day vote reports and how by-mail vote reports is something we're all aware of. And we're going to be a lot more cautious when it comes to projecting races because of those differences.
Stephanie Liebergen, Newsy, Miami.
That's it for us, gang. As always, thanks for watching. We'll be back next week, election week, so you can watch me look stressed and sleep deprived on In the Loop. Same time, same place. More top stories and hopefully a decent weekend are headed your way right now.
We're working hard to get you the news you need. We dig a little deeper on the stories of the day.
That's why we're here.
To help start making sense of it all.